Good. Well, sold out.
Okay, so I want to introduce Dick Spotswood next, and then as you're eating, we're going to move into this program because there's so much that we want to learn, so much to be said. So, I mean, you all know Dick Spotswood, right? Columnist for the Marin IJ. You know, what you might not know is that he was a city council member in Mill Valley for a number of years, 3 years mayor of Mill Valley. Dick is going to introduce our speakers and be the moderator for the Q&A through today's session. So, Dick, thank you very much for being here.
Susan, it's always a pleasure to be back to the Marin Coalition. Over the years, it's just, it's amazing what has this group has turned into. This is the largest attendance they've ever had. And I have to credit the current officers for just putting this back together, and the old officers for keeping it together for so many years. But it's just amazing. It's just great to have people so involved in civic affairs. First of all, let me just introduce this just a tad bit, but I'd like to also mention the elected officials that are present, and let's do that. And I'm going to also mention some of the former elected officials, because those of us who have done this kind of get nervous when somebody forgets us, so it's always nice to kind of remember those that have carried their water over the years. Larkspur City Council, Larry, and if you stand up this way, Larry Chu, Larkspur City Council. Also from Larkspur, Kevin Hara. Kevin? In San Rafael, we have Mayor Gary Phillips, Councilmember Kate Cullen, and I think Jim Schutz, the Assistant City Manager, is here? Yes. And somewhere in the room? Great. Former Councilman, now current Marin County member of the Board of Supervisors, Damon Conley, representing this very district. Damon. I didn't see her, but she's on the list. Diane first. Is Diane here from there? Right there. Diane, welcome from the Corte Madera Council. Town of Corte Madera. John McCauley, I did see from the Mill Valley City Council. John? I believe from Belvedere, we've got three. Mary Winters, Clara McCall, and Bob McCaskill. This is not a Brown Act violation. They can come to this. That's perfectly nice. From the high office of Vector Control Commissioner, that's sometimes known as the Mosquito Board. He's also a Ross Valley Sanitary District Director and former mayor of the town of Fairfax, Frank Egger. You know, the Homestead Valley Sanitary District is near and dear to my heart, mainly because I belong to the same Rotary Club as Burnett Trigoni as commissioner. Is Burnett here? He's not here. That's because his rumors he's going to run for supervisor. We'll let that go past. I started that. Greg Lockbank, former member of the San Rafael City Council and former Marin Community College trustee. My old friend Stone Coxhead and colleague, former mayor of the city of town of Tiburon, excuse me. Eva Long, member of the Marin Community College Board, trustee. Jerry Peters, director of the North Coast Railroad Authority. And former Larkspur Planning Commissioner, David Ratner. David? Those are our elected officials, and I want to thank you all for coming. And one more. Okay, who? Oh, I forgot, yes. Mention your name again. Maria, okay. Anybody else I forgot? Yes, back there. I can't even see that far. Oh, of course, Elizabeth, welcome. A member of the town of Ross Town Council. City Council, Town Council. Welcome, indeed. Anybody else? No? I know I've probably forgotten a form or something somewhere along the line, but my apologies. Jack Nixon, San Rafael City Council, of course. All right, we cover everybody. We got one more? Oh, Essie Blau, former member of the Marin County Healthcare District. Ezzy, welcome. That's it. You got them all? You're in. Okay. Everybody else all right? First of all, it's a pleasure being here. I had a role, the two speakers may not know, I'm a former pension trustee. I spent 9 years as a trustee of the Golden Gate Bridge Amalgamated Transit Workers Pension, which we were a happily funded pension, I might say, at the time, and a good operation. So I did go through all those International Foundation lectures for 9 years, so I had that experience under my belt. Yeah, you're right. Somebody said before that this has only been in the last 5 or 6 years that the nationwide interest in the topic of pensions has really taken off. It's a hot topic from Rhode Island to California. And we're here today not to have a debate. This is not a debate. This is an exchange of ideas. It's an exchange between our two speakers, but it's also an exchange of ideas with you. That's why the cards are out there. Please, if you have a question, we'll try to put them together so we have enough time. Our tentative time to pull the plug is 1:15. We can go a little bit longer than that, but we don't want to bore you. So that's where we're going. That probably means we won't have everybody's question answered. And if some of the questions are duplicative, we'll combine them so that we're trying to get the basic point of your question across. Again, not a debate. We're asking questions. We're trying to gather information, which will lead us, hopefully individually as citizens, to conclusions. But we're not going to solve the problems of the world today. We'll start to think about the problems of the world today. And we're going to do that with two very fine speakers. We couldn't ask for a better panel on the topic of pension reform in the county of Marin. Let's start with Roland Katz. Welcome, Rolly. Rolly is the executive director of the Marin Association of Public Employees. That's the union of Marin County employees representing about 1,300 of Marin County's about 2,000 public employees. Mr. Katz is a graduate at UC Berkeley with a BA in political science, graduated from, I'm happy to say, University of San Francisco School of Law, where I spent 3 happy years. And they weren't all happy, but...
Dean Ratner was the dean when I graduated.
Dean Ratner. I forgot to mention, not only a Larkspur Planning Commissioner, but Dean of the U.S. Law School, that's right. He was admitted to the State Bar in '84 and worked for the well-known firm of Neihart, Anderson, Nussbaum, Riley, and Freitas. Then he was with the Operating Engineers Union Local Number 3. They're the guys that drive the big tractors and stuff. And then he was with the Public Employees Local 1 from 2002 to 2014. He's a relatively new addition to MAPE's management team. Also is Bill Monnet. Bill is a board member of the Citizens for Sustainable Pension Plans right here in Marin County. Bill has an MA, Master's of Arts in Political Science from UC Davis, and an MBA in Finance from the University of California at Berkeley. Mr. Monnet was briefly an adjunct professor of public administration and then spent 24 years in Silicon Valley in various management positions at IBM, Siemens, and Cisco. A pleasure to have both Roland Katz and Bill Monnet here today. Thank you, gentlemen, for both taking your time. And Raleigh, I'm going to ask you, I know you also have some audiovisual stuff here. Gentlemen, you're pretty much on the honor system. It's 10 minutes each.
Thank you very much. So what we were going to start with on the PowerPoint, and we'll post it on our website, mape.org, newmape.org, is a video we've done about average rank and file employees of Marin County and how much they make. And there was a story back last summer about average county employee who makes $92,000 a year, and a lot of our members said, we haven't met those folks. Who are they? They certainly aren't us. And some of them are here. So we have some profiles of people who make substantially less than that and talk about how they live on the salary that they make. And, you know, I've got some information from the California Budget Project about what it costs to live in Marin County to just maintain an adequate or a modest standard of living. It means you don't own a house. If you're single, $38,248, 2 parents, 2 children, 1 working, $71,000 and change, 2 working, $99,000. So it's actually more expensive if you both work because you got to pay for childcare. And a single parent with 2 children, $96,000. The people we had on that tape, I think we had 3 people, 2 of whom, maybe all 3, don't live in Marin County because they can't afford to live here. So that's my segue to the issue of pensions. And as we say in our outline, pensions, good pensions, are vital to maintaining a middle class. We had a concept in this country one time, a social compact, that said you work a career and when you retire, you're going to be able to maintain the same standard of living or close to the same standard of living you had when you worked. We weren't going to have people go into poverty when they retired, which is what used to happen in this country before we had pensions and before we had Social Security. In other words, before we had a strong labor movement and an activist government. And I think most of us now know that the number of older people who live in poverty is much smaller than it once was, and there are actually now more children living in poverty than there were older people. So we created a system of pensions that says when you work, we're going to, and as I say in the summary here, pensions are nothing but deferred wages. I go to work for my employer, I work, and my employer defers a certain percent amount of my wage and puts it in trust so that when I retire, there will be something there for me to have a retirement. And we create things called defined benefit plans because, one, we want to say to people, when you retire, you're going to have a pension that's going to give you a benefit that allows you to maintain a standard of living similar to that which you had. So we're going to make sure there's a certain benefit there and you're not subject to the vagaries of the investment market and that just before you retire, the market goes like this, like it did a few years ago, and you suddenly have little or nothing. Talk to people who worked for Enron, who thought they had a life savings, and then Ken Lay and a few others took them and us to the cleaner, and suddenly people didn't have a pension. So we said as a society, that's something we're going to do. Another benefit of a defined benefit plan is you pool the resources of all of those people and take advantages of those economies of scale, the ability to diversify an investment portfolio and to have professional people manage those investments. So we said we're going to defer your pension, we're going to defer some of your wages, and then when you retire, you're going to be able to maintain a decent retirement. That's good for society. People who, when they are retired, have a decent income are not a drag on society. They are a plus on society because they're able to afford to buy things, pay for things, maintain a standard of living. If they don't have a decent retirement, they become an economic drag on society. We pay for it. We pay for it either through social programs, we pay for it if we pay directly, children paying for their parents. So we pay for it in a fashion that is not positive on the economy, and it's really the same concept as having a high-wage economy. When we had a vibrant middle class in America, when working people were able to make a decent living, the economy grew in a way that was beneficial to everybody. A lot of people in this room probably went to college on the GI Bill. A lot of people in this room probably bought a house on the GI Bill. Those things created a dynamic that led to an ever-expanding middle class, prosperity for an entire country, and growing economy, jobs, and the like. Now, how does a pension work? Because we get all these big numbers. Well, I got to stay with my slides. Pensions were intended to be part of a three-legged stool of retirement. Some would add a fourth, your house. So the three legs are Social Security, your pension, and your own savings. It's important to note that Marin County employees and many other employees in the public sector do not participate in Social Security. So they don't have one of those legs, and their pension is intended to be two legs, Social Security and pension. No Social Security for Marin County employees. That was something that happened years ago. Many other public sector employees, no Social Security. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about how it's funded, but I want to hit this point. There's a lot of talk now in this debate about, well, their pensions are better than mine. Their pensions are better than the average taxpayer, whatever the average taxpayer is. The definition of what constitutes an adequate pension is a function of what one needs to live in retirement, not how much one's next door neighbor has. And there are some basic guidelines about percentages of your income, and the less you make, the higher percentage of your income you need to be able to maintain a decent standard of living. And we have fallen in this trap in this country that because we have seen this downward movement of wages, of income for most people, that then the standard is anybody who's got something better needs to be brought down. as opposed to those who don't have enough should be brought up. Some used to say, I think Ronald Reagan said it, you know, a rising sea tide lifts all boats. That hasn't been happening a whole lot lately. But when people who work for a living and then retire have a good living, more of those more of those boats are rising. So it is not, in my opinion, a valid argument, quite frankly, it's a canard to say, your pension is too much because I don't have as good a one. I heard a guy once, Orange County newspaper, talking on this subject, and the average state pension was about $22,000 a year, which, yes, is skewed by the fact that some people retired years ago and some people didn't work a full career. And his comment was, well, the average 401k or IRA only gives people $14,000 a year. And so that was meant that $22,000 a year, I guess we were supposed to conclude, was too much money because other people only had $14,000 a year. Of course, they also had Social Security. I would suggest that the conclusion that one rationally draws from that is not that the pension is too great, but people stuck with 401ks and IRAs don't have sufficient retirement. So, how do these things add up to cost? Let me tell you something very basic about how pensions are funded. And it's art and science, and a lot of art. So the pension funds employ actuaries who make estimates, just like insurance and companies employ actuaries who make estimates. And they try to determine how much do the employer and the employee pay this year, how much money has to be paid this year by whomever, so that there's a sufficient amount of money paid this year that that money plus everything it will earn from now to the day the employee retires will provide enough money to pay for the benefit the person earned this year, however that benefit is determined. And that's what's known as the normal cost. These assumptions include things like how much money will we make on our investments, a very imprecise science, how long will people live, maybe more scientific, but always lagging a few years behind, how much will inflation be on consumer prices, how much will inflation be on wages. Those numbers rarely, if ever, are precisely met. Let's think about that logically. If we say we're going to earn 7.25% on our investment return, we're more likely to earn something somewhat more or something somewhat less. When those numbers, when the system doesn't earn as much, or when longevity, life expectancy exceeds that, that creates the big bugaboo we're going to hear about called unfunded liability. But when the fund exceeds those numbers, that creates what could be called excess earnings or surpluses. The systems are organized in such a way that people know we're not going to precisely meet the number every year, so we're going to smooth those gains as losses over years. And this county's retirement system says in those years we have positive, we're going to use those numbers to reduce the unfunded liability that accrued when we had negatives. And over 17, if we have an unfunded liability, over 17 years we're going to pay it off this year, and then if we have an unfunded liability next year, we'll pay that off. But if we have a plus, we can use some of that plus to pay off the unfunded liability. So there have been some things that have happened in recent years that have contributed to this number getting larger. One is that people are living longer. It's a good thing, as people point out. A second is that we made some enhancements to pensions in the late 90s, early 2000s, which in my own opinion, it's not an official position of MAPE, many of those were ill-conceived. We made improvements in pensions. We did it at a time when the stock market was booming. Alan Greenspan referred to it as irrational exuberance. And we also did some other pretty silly things, which we shouldn't have done. Because in America, we do a lot of things short term. I wonder how many people are buying SUVs again now that gas prices are down. We also cut the vehicle license fee for absolutely no reason, an absurd concept. And then we elected a B-rate Hollywood actor who played action hero because he said he wasn't going to raise it. So if we're going to be critical of decisions made in the late 90s, early 2000s on a stock market that could not continue at that rate based on companies that had never made a penny profit having their stock go up, and saying that was not a good idea, I agree, and I hope other people agree that cutting the vehicle license fee was equally a bad idea. And so you have those factors that have added to this unfunded liability, and then A very significant, if not the most significant factor, was we had an economic crash in 2008 and 2009. And if you look at the rate of return for our system, Marin County Employees Retirement System, you see years where they're getting double digits, far in excess of their assumption rate, and then you see the crash and you see it go way down like that. So I'm getting a signal to wrap up. On the question of putting this huge number, this daunting number of unfunded liability in perspective, I submit that what is far more important than what that number is what does it mean to the county budget, the city budget, the school district budget, how much of the budget has to be spent on pension this year, next year, not whether this number seems astronomical. So to wrap it up and conclude, pensions are vital to maintaining a middle class. They're vital that people can have a decent pension when they retire. The best way to do that is through a defined benefit plan. Slashing benefits for working people does not save us money. Austerity is not a sound economic policy. Compare what's happening in Europe to what's happening in the United States. We need good pensions for everybody. Those people who don't have them, we need to get them a good pension. Thank you.
Test. Thank you all for coming. This is such a good turnout, you know. No, I don't really need it, but will do. You know, Raleigh, we might consider going out on tour and charging. We can make some money off of this. No, I don't have a presentation today. I put on the table the one visual display that I wanted you to look at, and I didn't even make it. It was actually provided by Roy Given, our finance director for the county of Marin. It was the supplement to our tax bill that was sent to us last fall, one-page supplement. And on the back of it, it has a little article at the top called Retiree-Related Debts. And I can tell my whole story from this, and that's what I'm going to do. So if you look at that item on your table, it says retiree-related debts total $834 million, consisting of $335 million for retiree health care liability, $391 million of pension liability owed to the Marin County Employee Retirement Association, MCERA, and $108 million owed for pension obligation bonds owed to bond holders. Now, the health care liability is not the subject of today's debate or today's talk. It's a big number, you need to keep it in mind, but we're not going to talk about it today. We're going to focus instead on the $500 million of pension liability. So, how big is $500 million? Well, the same tax bill supplement you're looking at says that our operating budget for the year for the county is $508 million. So it's about a year's worth of operating expenses for the county. And what does that $500 million pension obligation, pension debt mean? Does that mean if we cut our operating budget by 10% a year, say $50 million for the next 10 years, we can pay it off? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that to pay it off, we have to write a check for $500 million today, this afternoon, because this debt, like all debt, has an interest expense associated with it. The pension liability owed to MCERA is charged in interest at about 7.25%. The pension obligation bonds have an average interest rate of about 5%. So the county is paying $34 million a year in interest expense before we even begin to pay down the principal of the debt. How much is $34 million? Well, remember that last fall we passed Measure a increased tax to fund the replacement for our emergency radio system. We need $46 million to replace our emergency radio system. So 1 year's saving on the interest expense alone in our pension debt would pay for 2/3 of the money we need for the emergency radio replacement. Pay for it in 1 year. So what I want to talk about today is not so much numbers. I really want to talk about an ethical defect in the plan and the design of our public pension systems. And this ethical defect results in an outcome I think is profoundly immoral. And I want to tell a story about it. The story starts on December 5th, 1996. This is when Alan Greenspan was giving his famous irrational exuberance speech that Roland just referred to. In this speech before the American Enterprise Institute, his speech titled "The Challenge of Central Banking in a Democratic Society," he asks, "Do we know when irrational exuberance has unduly escalated asset values which then become subject to unexpected and prolonged contractions. Or in plain English, Greenspan was saying the stock market is overvalued. We risk a damaging crash. What, if anything, should the Federal Reserve do about it? At that time, the Dow was at about 6,500, and the Fed's answer was we should do nothing. They did nothing. By the end of 1997, the next year, the Dow had risen to 7,900. In 1998, it continued to rise. There was a brief hiccup in the fall due to the Asian financial crisis, but by the end of 1998, it hit 9,200. An increase in 1999, it increased again, ending 1999 at 11,500, a 78% increase over the time when Alan Greenspan gave his irrational, exuberant speech. So, our pension funds, which were heavily invested in stocks, benefited enormously. In 1996, about the time of Greenspan's speech, here in Marin County, our pension fund had a debt of $50 million. By June 2000, this had turned into a surplus of $39 million. So, things are looking good. It was fun. What to do with all this money? Do we put it into a rainy day fund? That would be prudent to guard against the inevitable time when stock market values start declining. No, we didn't do that. We spent it. More specifically, CalPERS, the big state pension administrator, persuaded the legislature to increase pension benefits for state workers, both for work that would be performed in the future and retroactive benefits for work which had been performed in the past. CalPERS told the legislature that they were so well funded, the pension funds had so much money, that they could do this and it would not cost the state a dime. CalPERS essentially promised the legislature something for nothing. It was irresistible to the legislature. They agreed and passed Senate Bill 400, which basically provided these increases. Now, SB 400 resulted in a cascade of benefit increases across the state. State workers got benefit increases for their pensions. So too did county workers and city workers and special district workers. Everybody got a pension benefit increase. Now, here we have to pause. Why did this happen? Greenspan and others have been warning for years that stocks were overvalued. And why should CalPERS lobby for increased pension benefits based on temporarily overvalued assets? It doesn't seem to make sense. But if you examine how CalPERS is organized, then you see that CalPERS acted completely rationally. It does make sense. The CalPERS board of directors is mostly staff of public employees and their allies. It represents and acts in the interests of the employees. Employers have little effective representation. Also, and very importantly, our public pension plans are designed so that all the investment losses are paid by the employer, and the employer's liability is effectively unlimited. So, it was completely rational for the CalPERS board to lobby for increased pension benefits, to be funded with risky stock market investments, because they knew that if this investment bet paid off, the employees would get the benefit of it, and if this investment bet failed, then the employers would pick up the losses. Now, what I'm describing here is a classic case of moral hazard, a situation in which the decision maker is shielded from the possible adverse consequences of his decisions. Moral hazard in the big banks was a contributing cause of the 2008 financial crisis, and it's endemic in the design of our public pension plans. It's an ethical flaw in our public pension plans. Now let's return to the story. After its peak in December 1999, the Dow declined slightly in 2000, declined slightly again in 2001, and then in 2002 it crashed. By January of 2003, the Dow was at 8,000, down 30% from its 1999 peak. This was a second extraordinary event in financial markets, the first being the run-up of stock values prior to 2000. For Marin County, this was devastating. The pension fund surplus of $39 million had turned into a deficit of $110 million only 3 years later. And this was money owed by the county to MSERA. The pension debt at that time carried an interest rate of 8.25%. So effectively, the county had to pay $9 million of interest expense on this debt before it could even begin to pay down the principal. So what was the county to do? It's a lot of money. We borrowed the money. In 2003, Marin County issued $113 million of pension obligation bonds, $110 million to pay off the pension debt owed to MSERA, and $3 million went to the bond underwriter. By the way, the bond underwriter was Lehman Brothers Bank. The interest rate on those bonds is about 5%. So effectively, and notice this, Today, if you look at the supplement I put in front of you, the amount of money we still owe on this debt is $108 million. So effectively 12 years later, we've reduced almost none of that debt that was created over 12 years ago. And this debt is not scheduled to be finally paid off until 2026. Now, notice that the issuance of these pension obligation bonds did not extinguish our pension debt. It merely changed the parties to whom it was owed. We no longer owed any money to MCERA. We paid off our debt to MCERA. Now we owed money to bondholders. This refinancing also lowered our pension interest expense. Our interest rate was reduced from 8.25% to 5%, which is a very good thing, but the debt remained. Here, I want to pause the story and talk about the nature of this debt. This debt is basically for services of our public employees. Our public employees work and they provide services. The services of public employees are not assets. Buildings are assets. A police building is an asset. The work of our policemen are not. So effectively, we borrowed money for the services of our public employees. Services of our public employees are very valuable. Don't get me wrong. They're like groceries. Groceries are valuable. If you don't have food, you'll die. But food is not an asset. Your house is an asset. It may last 30 years. Groceries are not. Bananas do not last 30 years. So effectively what we're doing, when we finally pay off this bond in 2026, residents of Marin, some of whom were not even born when these services were provided, will still be paying for the services offered back before 2003. I find this immoral. I think it's a violation of good pension design. It's a violation of a fundamental tenet of public finance, which is that those who benefit should pay, and it's a violation of the principle of intergenerational equity. So, I'm hoping this story continued again. Stock market prices recovered, then they collapsed again in 2008. The end of the story is that today we have $500 million of pension debt. It was $50 million in 1996, now it's $500 million. So, it's not getting better. I hope that today's meeting will spark a public conversation in Marin County about what to do about this. And as we have this public conversation, I'd ask that we keep in mind three pieces of advice. And the first piece of advice is for our elected leaders. That advice is be honest. Most of you don't understand pensions, some of you do, and all of you have been reluctant to talk about it candidly in public. You have an opportunity coming up. Next fall, for the first time, you're going to publish financial statements which for the first time represent accurately, fully and fairly your true financial position. For the first time, you will present or publish accrual-based accounting statements which include your pension obligation debt. This is required, of course, by Government Accounting Standard Board Statement 68. We like to think of it as the Great Gatsby. And it's an opportunity for you to start a debate with your own citizens. The second piece of advice is for our public employees and their leaders, and that is don't be greedy. You've got a good deal. I think the people of Marin want you to have a good deal. But it can't be based on a plan which is so risky and so volatile and so costly that it threatens our cities with service insolvency. Last piece of advice is to the people on my side of the debate, and that is this: don't be mean. Our public employees are not the enemy. They're the paramedics that take you to Marin General Hospital. They're the cops that keep our cities safe. The public health workers that are trying to contain a measles outbreak here in Marin County. They are not the enemy. So as we have this debate, keep that in mind. I do believe we can't continue as we have been going. We must make changes. But please keep these three pieces of advice as we have this debate and try to come up with some sort of common answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Number of questions. Can you hear me out there? Number of questions from folks, and they're fall into three categories: Raleigh Katz, Bill Monnet, or both. Let's do it this way: one for Raleigh, one for Bill, one for both. Then we'll Raleigh Bill, and we'll do that. Follow that routine. Raleigh, we're going to start with you. Mr. Katz, please comment on the sizable disparity between the retirement benefits of rank-and-file employees, such as your members, and the benefits of safety and management employees. Is it fair? Is it sustainable?
Oh, I know, both of you gentlemen, a minute or so on that.
So safety employees, police officers, firefighters, other classifications, do have a more generous benefit than general employees. It's what's generally known as, it was 3 at 50, now I think it's 2.75 at 55. So that means that 1, they can retire earlier, 2, they can, each year of service gets them more. So clearly that's a more expensive part of the pension plan. But I think also to put in, and so the easy answer for me to say, no, the question is, it means management and safety are getting too much and we aren't. But I think to be a little more thoughtful about it, there is a reason as a public policy matter why we as a society want peace officers, firefighters to have an earlier retirement age. I was at a talk about 5 years ago, just a week or so before I turned 55, and I said, you don't want me chasing crooks and running into burning buildings. I'm now approaching 60. You don't want me chasing crooks running into buildings. So if you're going to design a plan, you certainly want for certain kinds of jobs in the public in the interest of the public safety, not in the interest of the employee's safety, to have a decent pension that people can retire earlier. In terms of management, if they're not safety, they get the same benefit we get. And again, it's an easy shot for me to say just get rid of it. We could get rid of all the management employees' pensions, and my guess is we'd still have a pension cost. However, I would say this, as my own philosophical perspective, people who make $200,000 a year don't need the same percentage of their salary when they retire as somebody who makes $50,000. So I personally am okay with a system that graduates that. Now, PEPRA, the Reform Bill, did do that to some degree by capping it's the Social Security number or a little higher if you don't have Social Security. So newly hired management employees are not going to get a pension on their full salary, they're going to get a pension on a smaller number.
Bill Monnet. Bill, would you please address any potential downside of assuming 7.25% of return on funds invested in today's world?
Sure. The downside is this. These public pension plans, as now designed, are highly leveraged financial vehicles. If you make bets, financial leverage magnifies gains and losses. If you make losses, they become very big losses. That's how Marin County went from a $39 million surplus to a $110 million deficit in the space of 3 years. Traditionally, our pension plan, 7.25%, which is now the target rate of return for MSERA, seems reasonable if you look back in history. They've earned that probably in the last 20 years, but in the last 20 years, they weren't targeting to get 7.25%. For most of that, they were targeting to get 8.25 or 7.75. It turns out that if we miss, let's take the city of San Rafael, where they have a ratio of assets to payroll of about 10 to 1. If we miss this target rate of return by 1 percentage point only, if we earn 6.25% over the next 10 years and not 7.25, hardly a disaster. This will increase San Rafael's pension debt or create new pension debt equal to their payroll, which is about $35 million. So it doesn't take it only takes a small miss in order to create a big loss. Again, it's the effect of leverage.
Gentlemen, this is for both of you, and it's a little bit something that Raleigh referred to in his last remark. Raleigh and Bill, can a limit of $100,000 a year, cap in other words, be placed on pensions? What impact would this have on liability?
So I can't give you a precise number. The simple answer is yes, it could be. That would take legislation. The legislature did it a slightly different way. It said that the first $110,000 or first $122,000 will be all it will be pensionable essentially. So it certainly over time will reduce some of won't necessarily reduce the liability. It will reduce the cost because remember, and I want to comment on a couple things Bill said, there's the normal cost of what we have to pay this year. So if you say we're only going to pay on $100,000, that reduces the normal cost. That in and of itself doesn't affect potential unfunded liability. What affects that, as we talked about before, was whether you make your earnings assumption and other assumptions. But I want to also say, Bill gives the example of a 7.25, should it be 6.25? You know, there's this argument about passing it on to future generations. This year's taxpayers and next year's taxpayers are pretty much the same group of people. We can never get the number precise, and so you can say it's too high at 7.25 because if it goes to 6.25, it's going to cost San Rafael X. But if you set it at 6.25 and you make 8.25, then arguably San Rafael taxpayers paid too much for pensions this year, and they're subsidizing next year's taxpayers, and they're going to have a surplus. And we address that by A, smoothing gains and losses, and B, using those gains to pay down unfunded liabilities. So you can't do this with a precise measurement. And we can pull out the charts, and if you take out the terrible years of 2008, 2009, there were lots of plus years in Macera, and many of them far in excess of the assumed earnings rate.
No.
Well, I would just like to go back to my comments. I agree with Raleigh. The projecting or forecasting investment returns is a roll of the dice. But the way our plans are designed today, there is an incentive, a powerful incentive, for the decision makers in the pension plans to take risks. And they do take risks. And they are incented to do so. It is logical for them to do so. So what we have seen in practice over the last 18 or 20 years is, in fact, that we haven't seen pension deficits fluctuate around zero. Some years we have a little bit of a surplus, and some years we have a deficit. For the most part, it's just been a deficit year after year. And as I say, in 1996 it was $50 million, now it's 500. We need to get rid of the incentive, the moral hazard, so that our pension boards are not incented to take excessive risks, whatever that excessive risk looks like in today's investment environment.
Thank you, Bill. Back now for a question for Raleigh, then one for Bill, and then we get to Bill. Raleigh, how can MAPE call a pension deferred compensation? A pension is a defined benefit, and deferred comp is a defined contribution plan, over which many government agencies offer and are 100% funded by the employee. So the question is, how can MAPE call a pension a deferred comp when basically defined benefit? It's a defined benefit, but deferred comp is something else.
I did not use the term deferred comp, I don't believe. What I said was pensions are deferred wages. That's what they are. My employer defers some of my wages today, so I have a retirement. They can be deferred into a defined benefit plan, as they are done here, or they can be deferred into a defined contribution plan. But my point is simply, when you're accruing a pension while you're working, your employer is simply deferring some of your wages so that when you retire, you have income.
Bill, the average pension for a MAPE employee is around $25,000 a year, and MAPE represents the majority of employees. How do we expect these employees to live on less?
Well, I'd like to pick up something that Raleigh said earlier. I'd like to see a bit more progressivity in the pension plan like we have in Social Security. If we're going to talk about pension reform, I think that's something we should put on the table. I'm very familiar with the numbers coming out of MCERA. You have to be very careful with them. I think we should keep this discussion at a pretty high level today and talk about principles. But if you want to have some fun with numbers, let me share with you. I don't doubt the number that 25,000. The average pension out of that, the average pension that MCERA pays is about $32,000 per year, if you look at the data. Now, there are 2,700 people that receive benefits from MCERA. 2,350 of them get pensions, 350 get disability. That $32,000 number actually includes 350 people that get zero pension, they get disability instead. So you really have to look at it. You can't look at pension alone, you have to look at pension plus disability, and then that average is more like $3,700 or $3,800. Now that includes people who are not in MAPE, it includes the safety workers and the top Met brass as well. And then you compare that to the average Social Security payment, which is $15,000. But that may not be fair either, Dick, because I don't know how many years that Social Security recipient worked, and I don't know how many years the average MAPE employee worked before getting the pension. So you really have to control for years worked as well. And if you look at the MCERA data, if we look at people that worked over 30 years or more, the average is over $90,000. So you can play with these numbers all day long and have good fun with it. And I don't think this is the right place to do it. But just keep in mind that the maximum Social Security pension is $31,704.
Raleigh and Bill, next question, this is for both of you. What happens with defined contribution plans if there is another stock market crash due to risky financial processes, as in the crash of 2008? Raleigh and Bill.
Me first? Okay.
Yeah.
I went first to last. That's
Okay,
fine.
well, I have to have Bill. Let's go for Bill first.
This is about defined contribution plans?
This is what happens with a defined contribution plan, with defined contribution plans, if there's another crash like 2008.
They will suffer, no question about it. There is different ways of creating pension plans for public workers, which look different from the defined benefit plan we have today. In fact, probably the best alternative is what is used in the private sector, the so-called Taft-Hartley defined benefit pension plans. These are about 10 million American workers are covered by these. The employees, for the most part, get a defined benefit pension. The essential point about these Taft-Hartley plans, though, is that the employer's liability is limited. In other words, the unions negotiate with the employer to make a contribution, 18% of payroll, 20% of payroll, 22% of payroll, something like that. And then the pension trust fund, usually managed by the union, manages that. This is also done in the Netherlands, both in the public sector and the private sector. In the Netherlands, that pension plans are designed this way so the employer's contribution is capped and limited. It creates an incentive for employers to stay in the plan, and it also encourages good behavior on the part of the investment administrators, not to take excessive risks and to be prudent with promises. So there are ways to, a simple 401k plan can put you at risk, but there are ways to provide retirement security for employees that are very different from a simple 401k plan.
Raleigh, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so I do, and I also just want to note, Bill comment about Social Security. Social Security was never intended to be the sole or primary source of retirement, as I noticed it was supposed to be one of the legs. I'm glad Bill mentioned Taft-Hartley plans because I'm very familiar with those. The simple answer is if you just have a defined contribution plan, you are completely at risk. You could lose most or all of your retirement if the crash happens around the time you want to retire. The problem that we face with unfunded liability is not unique to public plans. I'm a participant of a private sector Taft-Hartley trust fund, and I get letters all the time about the challenges facing that plan. Why? Because in the Great Recession, people stopped working, contributions weren't made, and investment returns went down. My personal opinion is there's nothing wrong with having flexibility at the bargaining table to bargain these kinds of issues. I would note that I think Bill is incorrect. I know he's incorrect. The plans are not run by unions. They are run by jointly trusted committees made up of an equal number of management representatives and union representatives. That's required by law. So as a personal opinion, I'm fine with negotiating how we deal with these pensions issues at the bargaining table.
Raleigh, that was a joint question. We'll go back to you, and then we'll have one for Bill. Raleigh, why do unions, this is a general question, you may not be able to answer for the entire labor movement here.
Oh, what the heck.
Why do the unions not mitigate the many abuses from spiking and double dipping?
So we got to get some definitions. And I won't duck it, Bill, Dick, by saying you're right, I can't speak for all unions. So let's talk a little bit about what those two concepts are. And the Pepper law that passed addressed the so-called spiking. So, it depends what your definition is, but spiking generally means something that happens at the end of one's career that suddenly drives up the cost of the plan, and there's some litigation involved in this, and I'm very familiar with Contra Costa County, and because there's litigation, I am going to duck to some degree answering that question because I've worked for a union that was involved in that. But I think it's a legitimate part of this debate. I think it's a legitimate question that you can suddenly, at the end of your career, have some extra things going to your retirement that were not, you and the employer were not making payments as part of your normal cost, and so all of it goes into unfunded liability. I think that's a legitimate area of public debate, and there should be things. And the new legislation going forward really has limited that severely, and if the Superior Court decision is upheld at the Court of Appeal, it's going to apply that not just to new hires, but to people who were in the system. And in fairness to those people, who these were the rules when they came, and they made certain decisions based upon that, including whether to negotiate for a higher benefit or not. So that's the spiking issue. So-called double dipping. I'll tell you what what I think the term means. I don't know if it's what the questioner meant. It's when I work for the city of X for 30 years. I work for the city of San Rafael for 30 years. I retire from the city of San Rafael, and I go to work for a CalPERS agency, and I'm able to collect my pension from City of San Rafael, Maceira, and I'm earning a pension under PERS. Raleigh Katz's personal opinion, not Mapes. I think there should be restrictions and limits on that. I think that, now, you know, but then you got double dipping. I know people who left an industry, left a career, not necessarily voluntarily, in their late 50s, early 60s, started to collect a pension from employer X, and in a completely different field, were working. You know, should somebody not be able to collect a pension in that case? I don't know. I think there should be restrictions. My own personal opinion, it doesn't offend me at all if you were to say, look, if you want to go from being the captain in the police department in City X that's in Maceira, and you want to become the chief in City Y that's in CalPERS, you're going to have to wait until you retire from second job to get your pension. A couple other wrinkles you'd have to work out. Some employers that have retiree health care benefits say you may only get your retiree health care benefit when you retire. Real case example of somebody I know. Worked for the employer 20, 25 years, was in her mid-50s. Change in her life. She fell in love with somebody who lived 50 miles away, got married, they lived in his house, she got a job closer to home with a different public agency. She went from one plan to another. She wasn't prepared to retire. She didn't need her retirement income, but had she not retired, she would have lost that 25 years of health care benefits she had accrued, and with her new employer, she would never have been able to get a retiree health care. So if we're going to say, and this is where it gets really detailed, we're not going to let you do that, then we can't put people in a position where they lose their retiree health care benefit as well.
Bill Monnet, why have public pensions not mirrored past tense, what has occurred in private sector pensions?
This is a very good question. And I don't fully know the answer. The part of it is in legislation. There is something called not legislation but law. There's something called the California rule, which is California state case law, which says that benefits for public sector workers or the accrual rate of a pension cannot be changed after the employee starts employment. It could be increased, but it cannot be reduced. So any adjustments in pension benefit accrual rates can apply only to new employees. This is sometimes, so this would explain why there is a relatively slow change in the design of pensions or the cost of pensions in the public sector. But you have an interesting case in the bankruptcy of Stockton, the Stockton bankruptcy case, where the judge effectively said that the California rule doesn't apply. Federal law trumps it. And yet the city of Stockton, which was bankrupt, chose not to make any reductions or changes in their pension benefits, even though they could have. So clearly there's more than just a legislative protection here. Part of what we're talking about is the fact that, for example, our safety workers, our police and fire people, that our elected leaders think that they have no choice, there's no alternative but to work with the people they have, and that effectively our local police and fire unions, for example, are monopoly suppliers. So I think that's part of the answer as well. I would add that in other countries looks very differently, that other countries in Europe are experimenting with contracting out services. In Great Britain, for example, even police services are contracted out. And the interesting thing was this was done by the Labour government. It was done because they wanted to save money. They wanted to spend more money in the National Health Service. And so much of the police work is actually done by contractors. The two companies which do this most, G4S and Serco Corporation, have offices in California. G4S has offices in San Francisco. It's not done in this country, but it could be done probably.
Gentlemen, I'm going to go to a joint question, and I'm going to put two together from the audience. One half, each of you will smile and say, "Thanks for that question. That's a great one." And the other half, each of you will say, "Oh, damn, super." Pick and choose as you see.
Your question, Dick?
Yeah, Raleigh. No, it's not. It's from two people here. And Raleigh, since on these joint ones, Bill went first last time. Have you go first this time? And question one: can we sustain a viable middle class without unions with political clout? That's the one you'll smile.
No.
And then we'll go on to the second one very quickly. Will the elimination of political contributions by the unions to the supervisors promote a less biased outcome in pension negotiations? I told you each of you would like one of these questions.
So, I'm not sure you mean by an illumination, because all contributions that are made are disclosed. So there's already full disclosure, unlike the Koch brothers and others who contribute to whatever those funds are called that don't have to disclose a thing. So any contribution MAPE or the firefighters or anybody else makes is already public record, and I'm sure the newspaper prints it regularly. But to also partially answer that, I want to comment also on a couple points Bill made and some
Just say elimination.
Elimination. Oh, elimination. Well, would eliminating, yeah, but if you'd like to do away with the First Amendment, be my guest. And are you going to eliminate, I'm serious, are you going to eliminate contributions from corporations? Are you going to eliminate contributions from anybody? Because are we going to have public financing? I'm for it, I'm with you. So can we all now put on real public financing? Because the notion that the labor movement is on a par with corporations and rich people in politics in this country is completely false. Corporations and the upper brackets of this country contribute far more than labor unions do, and that's just in campaigns. Then we talk about lobbying. How many lobbyists did the banking industry have in Washington, D.C. when we were attempting to reform the bank industry that put us in this mess? And I haven't heard that discussion at all, because we have sort of this false choice here. Pensions are too high for public employees. Private pension plans have more flexibility. What about the damage that was done to this country and every public agency in this room, in this county, by the banking crisis that was caused by the deregulation of the banking industry? Yes, it was signed by a Democratic president. And everything that's happened since then. So if we want to talk about leveling the political field, I'm all for public financing, a limit on how much anybody can give, matching little contributions with more than big contributions. The current Supreme Court will never approve that.
Thanks, Raleigh. Bill, same questions, and once again you can smile and frown. Can we sustain a viable middle class in America without unions with political clout? 1, 2, will the elimination of political contributions by the unions to the Marin Board of Supervisors produce a less biased position in negotiations?
Well, actually, I may change sides here, because I am extremely worried about the status of the middle class. It's not only in California, the United States, throughout all the developed world. You see it in Japan, you see it in Germany, you see it in Great Britain, in Italy, lots of places. The middle class is under pressure. One of the reasons, not the only reasons, but one of the reasons for that is the decline of unionization. Unions have a role to play in this country. Unions will not reverse the pressure on the middle class. Strong unions can help contain it. It should be part of the solution. I have nothing against unions. My pitch today was about moral hazard and bad incentives. So regarding the second question about whether eliminating union contributions to our candidates, well, I'm very optimistic. First of all, I think that is a First Amendment violation, so you can't eliminate union contributions to the Board of Supervisors. And I don't think it is quite as important as perhaps some of my colleagues do. I'm thinking back to the county supervisor race last June, a woman running against Judy Arnold, had no money, no experience, no backing from the unions, and came within 215 votes. So if the citizens of Marin are interested, if they participate, and the audience today, the attendance today looks like they're interested in participating, then I think that their voice can be heard. I'm not overly concerned that the unions use their First Amendment rights and try to express their interests and articulate for their own advantage.
Thank you, Bill. First of all, it's just a delight to hear a highly controversial issue in this overly politicized and overly partisan America we live in today, conducted by two gentlemen who know what they're talking about. In the old days, we would have real negotiations, and then you two guys would go in that room, maybe with me, and say, let's work out something here. You're right. That's passed, unfortunately, at least for the time being. First of all, folks, I want to thank you for coming today. This has been a terrific turnout on an extremely important issue for the future of the County of Marin, for its employees and its taxpayers today and tomorrow. So your being here, unfortunately, makes you the political elite. You always hear about things about the elites.
You're the elites. You're actually listening to topics like this and finding some details. So congratulations to you. I guess that makes you an opinion maker. So go out and make your opinions. Come again to the Marin Coalition. They have a terrific lineup of speakers. And it's been my pleasure to introduce you. I only ask you to do one thing twice a week on Wednesdays and Sundays. Open your independent. Bye-bye, everybody. Come on.